The night the boys showed up, the rain came down hard enough to blur the highway lights into long white scars. And Marcus Kane felt it in his bones before he even saw him. That old pressure behind the eyes that meant trouble was walking straight toward the club whether he wanted it or not. And he didn't, not anymore. Not after everything he'd buried. Marcus was standing alone in the Hells Angels clubhouse yard, smoking slow, listening to engines cool after a late run, when he noticed a skinny shape near the fence, a kid really, soaked hoodie hanging off narrow shoulders, shoes torn at the toes, eyes sharp but tired like someone twice his age, and the kid didn't flinch when the light hit him, just stepped forward and held something out with both hands like it weighed more than it should. A small metal case dented and scratched, the kind soldiers keep close. And when Marcus opened it and saw the metal inside, old bronze and red ribbon, Vietnam era, engraved on the back with the name, Jack Crow Dalton. The world tilted for half a second because Crow had been his road captain, his mentor, the man who taught him how to lead without begging for love. And Crow had died bleeding on a desert road 15 years ago. And that medal was supposed to be gone forever. The kid said his name was Eli, voice shaking but steady enough to hold. Said he found the medal in a pawn shop trash bin after the shop burned down. Said a man told him once it belonged to a biker who mattered. Said he walked almost 30 miles because he didn't know who else would care, and Marcus felt anger rise first, hot and sharp, because people didn't just find things like that by accident. But then he saw the kid's hands, raw and cracked, the way he stood like he was ready to run if needed, and the anger folded into something heavier, something closer to shame. Marcus asked where he was staying, already knowing the answer. And when the kid shrugged and said under the bridge by the old rail yard, Marcus closed the metal case and handed it back, told him to come inside and dry off. And the kid shook his head, said he just wanted to give it back, said he'd sleep under the bridge again. And that was the moment, the real trigger, the moment the old leader inside Marcus sat up straight and took control, because Crow had died protecting a family that wasn't his blood, because loyalty didn't end when the world stopped paying attention, and because a boy who walked miles to return a dead biker's honor didn't deserve concrete and rats for a bed. Inside the clubhouse, the air was thick with oil, beer, and old wood, and the men went quiet when Marcus walked in with the kid behind him, water dripping onto the floor, eyes following the metal case like it was a ghost. And Marcus felt the weight of every promise he'd ever made settle on his shoulders again. The promise to protect what mattered even when it hurt. The promise to never let the club become just another gang chasing fear. And as he looked around at the faces of men who trusted him with their lives, he knew this wasn't just about a kid or a medal. It was about the line he drew every day between who they were and what the world expected them to be. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Marcus gave Eli a towel and a plate of food and told him to sit. And when the boy ate like someone who hadn't in days, Marcus's mind drifted back to Crow lying on hot asphalt, telling him that leadership was choosing the hard road even when no one was watching. And when Eli finally looked up and asked why the medal mattered so much, Marcus told him the truth, that it was proof someone once stood for something bigger than himself. And that proof mattered in a world that kept trying to erase it. The rain kept falling outside, drumming on metal and memory. And Marcus stepped into the back room to make a call he'd hoped he'd never have to make again, because medals like that didn't just disappear, and boys like Eli didn't end up under bridges without someone pushing them there. And as his voice dropped low and controlled, he felt the old scars inside him burn awake, the ones left by corrupt cops who sold kids to traffickers, by rival crews who used fear like a currency, by choices that saved the club but cost him sleep. And he knew deep down that bringing Eli inside had already set things in motion, that someone out there would come looking, and that when they did, the Hell's Angels wouldn't be able to look away, not with Crow's name sitting on the table and a runaway kid trusting them with the last decent thing he owned. And as Marcus watched the boy finally slump forward, asleep at the table for the first time in who knows how long, he understood this was how wars really started, not with gunfire or sirens, but with one small, human moment that refused to stay small, a choice made in the rain that would echo through every mile of dark highway to come. Morning came gray and slow, the kind that made the clubhouse feel like a bunker holding its breath. And Marcus stood at the long table with coffee gone cold while the rest of the club filtered in one by one, boots thudding, jackets creaking, eyes moving to the corner where Eli slept curled on a couch with a borrowed blanket. And no one said anything at first because they all understood without being told that something had shifted. Big Rooster took his seat nearest the door, massive shoulders, filling the space. The club's enforcer who spoke little and ended fights fast, his scarred hands resting calm like weapons at rest, while Dutch slid in beside him with a notebook already open, the strategist who saw angles before anyone else. And Patch followed, carrying a medical kit out of habit, the club's medic whose soft voice hid hands that had pulled more brothers back from death than any prayer ever did. Then Wheels leaned against the wall by the window, their lookout and runner, always, watching the street even when he pretended not to care. And last came Lila, the club's lawyer on paper and conscience in practice, not patched but family all the same, her eyes sharp as she took in the room and the sleeping kid. Marcus cleared his throat and set the metal case on the table, opening it so the light caught the worn metal, and a low murmur passed through the men because Crow's name still carried weight, still hurt. And Marcus told them what Eli had told him about the pawn shop. Fire, the walk, the bridge, and he didn't soften it because these men respected truth more than comfort. And Rooster finally spoke, voice like gravel, saying someone burned that shop to cover tracks, saying kids didn't just end up with war medals unless somebody sloppy dropped it or somebody cruel used it as leverage. And Dutch nodded, flipping pages, already connecting dots, talking about a local crew that ran pawn fronts for a cartel lieutenant named Moreno, a man who liked to buy cops the way other men bought coffee. And Wheels added that he'd seen Moreno's trucks near the rail yard lately. Same place Eli slept, same bridge where runaways disappeared and nobody filed reports. Patch knelt by Eli then, checked his pulse like he would any wounded brother, whispered that the kid was malnourished and bruised under the hoodie, old bruises, not from falling, and the room went colder because that meant hands, not accidents. And Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest as the moral math began, the part of leadership no one envied, where every choice saved something and damned something else. And he told them straight that bringing Eli in made them visible, that Moreno wouldn't like loose ends walking into a biker clubhouse with a dead man's honor. And Lila leaned forward and said quietly that if they did nothing and sent the kid away, he'd end up back under that bridge, or worse. And if they acted, they'd be stepping into a war the city would pretend not to see until. Blood spilled, the banter came then. Not jokes exactly, but the small verbal jabs that kept fear from settling too deep. Rooster telling Dutch's plans always got too clever, Dutch telling Rooster thinking was allowed now, and then Will's asking who'd babysit the kid during rides. Patch saying the kid might need school before saddle time. And for a moment Marcus saw what Crow once saw, a family that argued because it cared, and he let it breathe before bringing them back to the edge by asking the question that mattered: who was in? Because loyalty wasn't assumed here, it was chosen every time. One by one they nodded, even Lila, because some lines couldn't be crossed backward, and the planning started clean and fast. Dutch laying out a quiet approach, watching Moreno's routes, identifying which cops were paid and which were just tired, Rooster volunteering scare but not kill unless pushed. Patch insisting on exit plans because nobody bled on his watch if he could help it. Wheels offering to run eyes on the bridge and the rail yard to see who'd been sniffing around. And Marcus assigned himself the hardest part, talking to Eli when he woke, telling him the truth without turning him into bait, because the boy deserved agency, not rescue theater. When Eli finally stirred and looked around like he expected to be chased out, Marcus sat with him and explained who they were and what danger followed him. Explained that the metal mattered because it reminded them who they had been and who they refused to stop being. And Eli listened with that too-old focus, asking if Moreno was the man with the snake tattoo who came by the bridge sometimes, asking if the men who took his backpack were coming back. And when Marcus said maybe, Eli swallowed and said he didn't want to cause trouble. And Marcus told him trouble had already chosen him. The best they could do now was choose each other outside. Engine started and stopped as Wheels slipped away to scout, and hours later, he came back pale, saying a black SUV had idled near the clubhouse twice. Different plates, same driver, and that a uniformed cruiser followed it once before turning off, like a warning instead of protection. And Lila confirmed what that meant in legal terms, that eyes were on them, that Moreno was patient and liked to test boundaries before breaking bones, and the room tightened again as Marcus felt the path narrowing. The sense that whatever came next would not be avoided by silence or goodwill. As night crept in, the club rode out in pairs, not to fight, but to be seen, engines echoing through empty highways like a statement written in sound. And Marcus rode last, scanning mirrors, thinking of Crow, of the metal worm in his pocket, of a boy asleep under their roof for the first time in months. And he knew this chapter wouldn't end quietly, that Moreno would make a move to remind everyone who owned the dark corners of the city. And as the lights of the clubhouse faded behind, them and the road stretched thin and black ahead, Marcus felt the unavoidable truth settle in, that loyalty had been declared, lines had been drawn, and the next sound they heard might not be engines at all, but something meant to make them flinch, something meant to test whether the Hell's Angels still remembered how to stand their ground when the night pushed back. The move came sooner than Marcus expected, because men like Moreno never waited once they smelled fear, and it started small the way real violence always did, with silence where there should have been noise, Will's not checking in on time from the rail yard, and a chill spreading through the clubhouse like a bad memory. Marcus pacing while Dutch kept calling and getting nothing but dead air, and Eli sitting stiff on the couch, pretending not to listen even though every word landed hard. And when Wheels finally staggered in just before midnight with a split lip and eyes full of fury, the truth spilled out fast, that Moreno's men had grabbed him under the bridge, asked questions they already knew the answers to, showed pictures of Eli sleeping on the couch taken from across the street, and let Wheels go on purpose so the message would arrive with blood on it. The room went quiet in that dangerous way, where nobody reached for weapons yet because the decision hadn't been spoken, and Marcus felt the old weight again, the knowledge that this was the point of no return, and Dutch laid it out blunt, that Moreno wanted the kid back or gone, that the corrupt cops on his payroll would make sure any call for help vanished, that the pawn shop fire was insurance because the metal had been used to pressure a veteran widow who refused to move off land Moreno wanted for a new route, and when she didn't break, they burned her livelihood and dumped the metal, never expecting a runaway to grow a conscience. Eli finally spoke then, voice shaking but clear, saying the men had heard him before, that they used kids like tools because no one filed reports for kids without addresses, that if he went back, maybe they'd stop coming for the club. And Marcus snapped harder than he meant to, telling him he wasn't a bargaining chip, telling him nobody in this room survived by trading the weak to the wolves. And Rooster backed him up with a low growl that promised consequences. The betrayal hit next. Sharp and unexpected, when Lila got a call from a precinct captain she'd trusted for years, warning her off in careful language that sounded like advice but smelled like threat, telling her to keep the bikers quiet because Moreno's people were now interested. And when she hung up, she admitted the captain's name had been on Dutch's list of clean cops, which meant Moreno had reached higher or someone had flipped. And the room absorbed that reality with clenched jaws because it meant nowhere. It was safe, not the bridge, not the clubhouse, not even the law they pretended existed. Marcus made the call then that would define everything, telling Dutch to plan an extraction of the widow tied to the metal, telling Patch to prep the infirmary because blood was coming whether they wanted it or not, telling Rooster to ready men, but not ride yet, because this had to be precise because reckless violence would get Eli killed in the chaos. And as they worked, the past kept intruding. Marcus, seeing Crow again in fragments, hearing his voice say that justice wasn't about winning, it was about ending cycles, and that thought almost broke him when Moreno himself called, voice smooth and amused, congratulating Marcus on the hospitality, calling Eli by name like a pet, and offering a deal that wasn't one. Bring the kid to the rail yard at dawn, and Moreno would forget the rest. And Marcus listened without interrupting, then said only that Crow's medal was back where it belonged and hung. Up, knowing that was the answer that guaranteed bloodshed. The night fractured after that in emotion and waiting, engines starting and stopping without rides. Men checking weapons they hoped not to use. Eli sitting with Patch as bruises were cleaned, confessing in a rush that he once stole food from the widow's shop and came back to apologize, that she'd told him about Crow, about promises made and kept, and Patch listened like a confessor, promising that sometimes adults did the right thing. Late but still did it. And when Wheels volunteered to lead Moreno's men away if needed, Marcus gripped his shoulder hard, seeing the younger version of himself there, reckless and loyal, and told him only if ordered. Dawn bled into the sky pale and ugly, and Moreno didn't wait for it, because his convoy rolled toward the clubhouse just after 3, headlights cutting the dark, sirens conspicuously absent. And Marcus felt the betrayal land fully when he saw a police cruiser peel off the side street and block the far end of the road, not to help, but to trap, and Rooster cursed under his breath as Dutch adjusted plans on the fly, sending half the men through the back while Marcus stayed visible with Eli and Lila inside. Bait without saying the word. The confrontation exploded without warning, tires screeching, doors slamming. Moreno stepping out smiling like a man at a party he owned, flanked by armed men who didn't bother hiding. And he spoke loudly about property and order and how runaways were trash the city didn't miss. And Eli trembled but didn't look away. And Marcus stepped forward and told Moreno the city was built on promises men like him broke. And for a second it looked like words might end it, until a shot rang out from somewhere stupid and panicked, shattering the moment, turning tension into chaos as Rooster's men moved like muscle memory made flesh, not to kill, but to control. And Patch dragged Eli back as bullets chewed wood and glass. And Marcus felt time, slow enough to see the corrupt cruiser's lights stay dark, to see Moreno's smile vanish in a rage, to hear Dutch shout a warning about a second team moving in from the alley. And in that split second, Marcus made the shocking decision Crow would have approved of, ordering Wheels to take Eli and run not away, but toward the widow's place, because Moreno would never expect them to protect what he wanted burned. And as engines roared and men fought to hold lines they never wanted to draw, Marcus understood that sacrifice wasn't always dying. Sometimes it was choosing to be the one the devil focused on while the innocent slipped past. And as the night finally shattered into full violence, he knew there would be no clean ending, only truth paid for in pain, and whatever survived would carry scars that told the story long after the gun smoke cleared. The end didn't come with a clean line or a single punch. It came in pieces scattered across a long, shaking night, and Marcus felt every one of them as the fight spilled away from the clubhouse and into the city's forgotten veins, sirens finally wailing too late to matter, Rooster limping with blood soaking his boot, but still standing between Moreno's men and the door like a wall that refused to fall. Patch-working hands slick and steady under flickering lights, saving Wheels after a round tour. Through his shoulder during the escape, and Dutch shouting coordinates into the chaos with a calm that felt unreal. And through it all, Marcus stayed locked on Moreno, chasing him down an alley that smelled like piss and rain, the cartel boss shedding his smooth voice and showing the animal underneath as he ran, because power only felt good when it was unquestioned. The final collision happened near the widow's shop, the burned-out shell still black with soot, where Eli had been taken because Marcus had known Moreno's greed would pull him there like gravity. And when Marcus arrived, he found Wheels slumped behind a dumpster guarding Eli with his good arm, and Moreno standing over them with a gun shaking just enough to show fear had finally caught him, ranting about ownership and order and how men like Marcus pretended to be righteous while living on violence. And Marcus listened because this part mattered, because endings shaped what came next, and he told Moreno that violence wasn't the sin, choosing who deserved it was. And when Moreno fired, the gun jammed, a small, stupid failure that ended an empire, and Rooster came out of the shadows and put Moreno on the ground hard enough to knock the breath out of him. Not killing him, because Marcus raised a hand and said no, because death would let Moreno escape consequences he'd dodged too long. The police arrived then in force. Not the bought ones, but the ones scrambling to control a scene that had gotten too big to bury. And Lala stepped forward with evidence Dutch had fed her all night. Burner phones, ledgers, videos of the captain taking cash. And the truth felt like a building collapsing, loud and unavoidable. And Moreno screamed as cuffs closed, promising revenge from his cell, promising that men like him never really lost. And Marcus leaned in close and told him maybe not. But tonight he did, and that would have to be enough. The cost became clear in the quiet after, when ambulances took Rooster and Wheels away. Under harsh lights, when Patch finally sat down and shook because adrenaline couldn't carry him anymore. When Dutch stared at his notebook like it had betrayed him by being right, and when Eli stood in the ruins of the widow's shop holding crow's metal with both hands, tears cutting clean lines through soot on his face, asking what happened next. And Marcus didn't lie, telling him there would be courtrooms and headlines and nights where the noise came back, telling him the club would take heat and maybe lose territory, telling him some scars never faded, but also telling him that promises mattered, and that tonight they'd kept one. The widow came in the morning, small and tired and furious that anyone thought they could decide her worth. And when she saw the medal, she touched it like a prayer and thanked Eli first, because she understood who the courage belonged to. And Marcus felt something ease in his chest he hadn't realized was knotted for years, a sense that Crow's voice could. Finally, rest. Weeks passed, and consequences kept coming. The good and the bad tangled together. The corrupt captain arrested, Moreno's network exposed enough to slow but not erase it. Rooster walking with a cane and a grin. Will's learning to write left-handed. The clubhouse quieter but steadier. And Eli enrolled in school with a backpack that didn't smell like fear anymore, sleeping on a bed instead of concrete. Still flinching sometimes, but laughing more, and Marcus watched it all with the careful distance of a man who knew peace was temporary but still worth protecting. The final night of the chapter came without drama, just Marcus riding alone down an empty highway, engines from distant trucks humming like ghosts, Crow's metal heavy in his jacket pocket, and he pulled over under a sky washed clean by rain and thought about leadership again, about how it wasn't glory or control, but choosing to stand when walking away would be easier, choosing to carry the weight so someone else didn't have to. And he understood that justice had been delivered, but not neatly, that some men paid in cells, and some paid in bones, and some paid by never sleeping quite right again. And as he turned back toward the clubhouse lights glowing faint in the distance, he knew the road ahead would keep testing them. New Morenos rising, new kids falling through cracks, but also new chances to draw the line. And for the first time in a long while, Marcus smiled into the wind, not because the fight was over, but because the reason for fighting was clear, and that he'd learned was the only ending that ever really mattered. If you like this story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep bringing you powerful stories like this. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and let us know which part of the story hit you the hardest. Your support means more than you know.